Welcome to the Mindful Millennial Podcast, where host Seth Marcus dissects and discusses all things impacting the millennial mind. Mentors, peers, and professionals share intimate conversations on subjects such as entrepreneurship, exercise and health, the blessings and curses of technology, travel, and how to navigate adulthood in this age of information. We're the largest generation in history, and we dictate the future. The Mindful Millennial finds a signal through the noise.
Guys, I don't know where to start with this one. I've been off the grid a bit, and I haven't got an episode out to you in far too long. I knew working while traveling would be difficult, but y'all deserve more. Not that I haven't been staying busy. Since the last episode, I left Barcelona for Morocco, Sevilla, and now Portugal. Every day has been an adventure. This digital nomad lifestyle is not for the faint of heart. Living out of a suitcase can be very destabilizing. And currently I'm writing this introduction while watching a group of travelers passing eggs around with spoons in their mouths. There's no shortage of sangria here in Lisbon. As I record this, I'm in a luggage closet, the only quiet area in the entire building. No doubt the most difficult part of working while traveling is the same as being self-employed anywhere, budgeting your time. New cities, bus rides, loud hostels. There's a million excuses, but you gotta get the work done. When I left the US, I resolved to communicate via photography and the podcast. However, a mentor who I someday hope to get on the show asked me to keep him updated. He doesn't use social media, so email is the only way to stay in touch. So I spent a good hour writing an email to him and shared a link to some of the photos I had been taking along the way. After I sent it, I went ahead and forwarded it to my parents, my aunt and uncle, and some close friends. Before I knew it, I was sending this email to a couple dozen people. So when writing the second update, I decided, screw it. This is decent content, so call it a travel blog, a photo journal, whatever. The updates to my trips, including a link to all the photography, are live on themindmill.com. I'll still be releasing new episodes, and I have so much more to talk about from this time abroad. But for now, check out the Mind Mill travel posts on the website, and all the links will be available on the social media accounts. Today's episode is with Greg Woodruff. Greg is a martial arts competitor and instructor, a guide at Yellowstone National Park, and a yoga teacher. He is a 5th degree black belt in Tang Soo with over 20 years experience. He's a lifelong outdoorsman and spends roughly half the year in nature. If there's ever an apocalyptic scenario, Greg's the man to team up with. The guy knows the woods. Greg has a gift and a passion for teaching his skills to kids. The self-discipline and confidence found in the practice shapes his character, which he now shares with the youth in his community. Greg discovered yoga about 4 years ago, around the time we first met. He now applies yogic breath, stretching, and philosophy to his martial arts teaching, providing unique and invaluable tools to his students. Greg grew up in Alabama, an area of the country known for football, manners, and family values, though not always associated with mindfulness. What has always struck me about Greg is his ability to absorb the very best of his Southern upbringing and combine it with a progressive and healthy lifestyle. He is kind, courteous, and carries a passion for serving others. We have both spent much of our lives in the South and have a love for the land, traditions, and people. We also see the negative sides of some systemic habits in the South, which we dive into in this interview. You can tell from our candor that Greg and I are very close. Our friendship has only been strengthened through the years, despite most of it living in different areas. We decided to do a Mind Mill interview while he was briefly passing through Denver on his way to Yellowstone for another season of work. We discussed the values of learning martial arts as a child and how that, combined with yoga, may just be the cure to so many issues affecting the youth today. We also talk on reverse engineering goals into daily practices, the clarity found only in the outdoors, and the power of positivity, no matter what the situation or location. Greg is one of my favorite people, and I'm excited to share his story on the Mind Mill. So let's get going. Greg, welcome to Mindful Millennial.
What's up, Seth?
Man, it has been so good hanging with you the last few days. It's been moving a lot the last few years, haven't you?
Yeah, I try to stay on the move. Don't stay in one spot too long.
Yeah, well, me and Greg have been friends for years now. Maybe you could tell the audience how we ended up meeting the first time.
Well, I was living in Denver area at the time and dating a dear friend, and we met through her. And you were on a date with her roommate.
That's right.
So we met up, and I think we initially started talking about music or martial arts, landed on those two topics eventually, and worked up some kind of trade agreement.
That's right. That's right. If I remember right, I was getting ready to do my first traveling. I wanted to be a little bit more rehearsed in my self-defense. And when we started talking and you taught martial arts, I decided maybe I could offer him a trade for what we do, guitar lessons or yoga. I think it might have been yoga.
Might have been. It might have been. I just know that we were on the mats together doing martial arts, and then I had my guitar there, so it was music.
Yeah, it was kind of just a mix and match, and that kind of quickly devolved into just us.
And then we did some yoga
out
in the backyard of your old place. So it was both. Yeah.
It wasn't until like a year later that you started getting way into yoga yourself.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that. So I wanted to ask you, every time you move, you find you got to kind of relieve yourself of a lot of your possessions and fit everything into your car and just move forward. And it can be like a cleansing practice. What's been the toughest thing for you to let go of as far as personal belongings?
That's a good question. Probably books.
Yeah.
Probably the books, the books that you read that made a big impact on you, and you want to be able to like go back to that. But you realize after a couple of seasons moving around that, I haven't moved that item since the last time I moved it here with me. And so that's like a telltale sign that, regardless of my feelings for that object, it's time for it to go. Probably books.
It's tricky. When I moved to this house that we're recording in right now, it was kind of the opposite effect. I wanted to get rid of a lot of things, but I moved into a home that had more space. And then you start falling into the common, I got to have a coffee table here. I got to have a bookshelf. You just start building more apparatus or apparati or however you say it for more stuff, right? A bookshelf would look really cool here, but now I need a bunch of trinkets and books to put in it. And it just kind of like spirals. Like, well, you have to have a TV in the main room, right?
Right.
You gotta have TV, you got to have speakers or whatever.
Yeah.
So what's next on the plate for Greg Woodruff?
I'm headed to Yellowstone. I'll go through early March as a snow coach driver in Old Faithful. So cool. They have snow coach drivers in Gardner, which is right outside the park towards the north. And then they have drivers down inside the park in Old Faithful, and I'll be there.
Nice.
So I'll just give guided tours through the park and drive the snow coach and hopefully see some wildlife, be able to educate the guest on not just the wildlife, but a little bit of the history of the park, a little bit of the scenery they're looking at the time. And if I get lucky, I might go on a couple ski tours and get to ski with my guest. And other than that, just a lot of hopefully constructive time studying when I'm off, preparing for the next tour, and maybe a little bit of study on the side for my own pleasure.
What do you study while you're there?
Well, it gets dark at around 5, so you got to be productive. I mean, there's an employee pub, and of course you can go and shoot some pool and have a good time. And there's a place for that too, just to kind of hang out with the other employees and just kind of fellowship. And it doesn't always have to be about partying inside the pub. It's just a good time in the winter for me in general to kind of focus on what I'm interested in next, whether that's a part of my martial arts or a possible career with being a yoga instructor, or it might just be like an earth science that I'm interested in, geology or archaeology, just kind of reading up online what I can because I don't really have a lot of books on those topics with me.
Do you have good connection in Yellowstone where you stay, or are you pretty off the grid?
We've got Wi-Fi and stuff. We got cell service in Old Faithful. Wi-Fi is fairly strong. I don't think we could all be streaming Netflix at the same time, but it's good enough to, surf the internet and educate yourself on something.
How'd you get into the Yellowstone community? Because this is not your first time there.
That was 2000. I think I did my first application in 2008, and it's just an online application, YellowstoneJobs.com. And the company is Xanterra, and they have contracts over multiple national parks. I think there's a few cruise ships that they employ as well. It's a contract that they have with the park, and then I work for that company. An ex-girlfriend found it online, and we were both going to go, and one thing led to another back home, and I ended up going by myself. It was the best thing that ever happened, man. Like, just to get out and have access to other opportunities as well. Like, even if you're not super in love with national parks or Yellowstone or whatever, you're meeting people on a daily basis that you'd never come in contact with, and they may be passionate about the same thing you're passionate about. So for me, I landed right where I needed to be, but a lot of people just use it as like a place to find something else.
There's so much benefit that you can find from the quiet and the outdoor. We forget that when we're living in our luxury, our screens, our phones.
Yeah, there's that too. If you get, especially when you get out in the backcountry, you really have an appreciation for just being comfortable, being warm and being fed, and not necessarily having to worry about an animal, that might tear your tin apart if you don't store your food right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that we take for granted that I'm super grateful for.
Sure. So what are you planning on doing differently this time around in Yellowstone that you didn't do the first time?
All the returning employees have like a desire to get out and enjoy the park more. And that might be why the guided positions, there's like an allure to them, because those people are out in the park every day looking to experience it for themselves and for their guests. I think each time we go back, it's like, man, I hope I really optimize my off days. Not just catch up on laundry and wax my skis. Just have all that done on the side throughout the week, even though you're preparing for tours and doing other things, so that when you have your days off, you're able to experience it to the fullest. Get out and do a 14-mile ski if you can.
Is there a lot of good skiing out in Yellowstone?
Mostly cross-country skiing. They have some groomed trails. There's a few of the hiking trails you can do in the summer that you're allowed to ski in the winter. There's some lakes that you can go anywhere legally, but they definitely prefer you to stay on trails. You could go drop the edge of the caldera if you wanted, the rim of the old super volcano.
Damn.
You could go drop that joker.
Is that something that people do?
I'm sure it's been done. I mean, there's multiple places where you could do it safely, and I'm lucky that there's a few guys that I went to EMT school with. They were pretty much teaching it. They do a lot of backcountry skiing, so hopefully I'll get to link up with them and have a safe group to go out and ski with if I'm going to do anything major like that. But for the most part, it's cross-country skiing. That's what the guests are doing, at least.
Yeah. So for those of us who have been to Yellowstone, or those of us who have not been, what's your personal favorite sites to see, activities to do while visiting the park?
Well, hiking, of course. I think depending on the time of the year would probably depend on which trails I'd like to go down. The later into the summer you get, the less mosquitoes there are. So if you know where those damper areas are, then you can kind of avoid those areas in the beginning of the season when things are more moist. And then kind of just knowing where the fish are going to be. If you're into fly fishing, it would kind of dictate which trails that I'd want to go down at what time of the year. But all that stuff's pretty easy to find, and thankfully we have ranger stations where you can go in and get information from past seasons, but also get information for like what's going on right now. How high are the water fords that you might have to go across and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the more research you do, the more you're able to kind of enjoy the park, get away from the guest, and really experience something wild.
So I'm planning on coming out there. If you're still there in the summer of next year, I will definitely visit you. Are you trying to stay longer, or are you going to see where you're at in March when the season ends?
It'll probably determine kind of a few things. There's a business I'm involved in Alabama that I want to stay committed to, and depending on where that business is at the time, I might go back and support that, or I might take a summer position in the park. There's a few positions with Xanterra I'm interested in, like possibly fishing guide on the lake.
Xanterra is the private company that works in Yellowstone, right?
Right,
Okay,
right.
Cool.
And so they have guided fishing tours where you can go out on Yellowstone Lake and in a boat and just fish for lake trout all day. Be a pretty good gig doing that. But I volunteered with the Park Service a lot doing backcountry work in Old Faithful, and that's the end-all, be-all position for me, at least. That's where I would, if I got that position, I could see myself spending 5 to 10 years doing that. I've volunteered with them enough at this point to where they'll know I'll do a good job and I'll work hard. I just got to kind of commit to it and wait for somebody to leave.
As long as I've known you, man, you've been just a very committed individual. You find your passions and you stick with it. It's just one of my favorite things about you. And also, it's one of those things that it makes me miss you when you're out, not around. But when we keep in touch, it's really good to fulfill each other and to kind of keep each other motivated to doing our projects, right?
Yeah.
Staying to work.
It's probably the discipline from martial arts. We were both raised in martial arts, and both had good parents and just drew a lucky hand and took advantage of it.
Right. It's about taking advantage of it. There's a lot of people who don't have as lucky of an upbringing as we have, and they make it work anyway. And there's a lot of people with questionably better upbringings than us that never choose to seize it.
Right.
So there's something to be said about the discipline. I think that neither of us are by any means like on cruise control. Neither of us are like, no, we got this all figured out, man.
Right.
But I think the most important trait that we resonate in our friendship is this desire to keep moving forward and to realize that the work's never done. And when it is done, it's time to step back and reevaluate.
Yeah, when I get comfortable, that's when I start getting red flags or do little triggers of, oh, I need some outside stressors to keep me pushing forward.
So what introduced you to martial arts?
I think probably like, I'm going to assume it was the Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers or something as a kid.
Yeah.
Karate
Kid.
I just remember begging from like kindergarten to second grade when my mom finally let me. I started, in an after school program. So like my instructor came to the elementary school and did a little program after school, and I started there. And then when I went to test at the studio, that's when I was like, oh, didn't know this place existed. I need to be coming here all the time. And so my mom started taking me there.
What type of school of martial arts did you start in?
It was Tang Soo. So Tang Soo Muay Kwan. So Tang Soo is a Korean kicking style, much like Taekwondo. It's just rooted in a little bit more of the tradition of the style that originated in Korea. There's 6 different schools of Tang Soo, and Tang Soo Muay Kwan would be the more popular one. And there's a whole Southeastern Tang Soo Karate Association.
Southeast America?
Correct, yeah.
Right, okay.
And our studio was underneath that. My instructor's father, rather, if I'm remembering correctly, kind of helped found the Southeastern Tang Soo Karate Association.
You were in that for how long before you moved into what you do now, which is the jiu-jitsu?
I did all through elementary school, middle school, did like a year and a half in a college close by. So all the way through maybe like 20 or 21. I started at 7, and then around 20 or 21 is when I think I was 21 when I left for Yellowstone my first year.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you been twice or 3 times?
I've been to Yellowstone for 6 seasons. This will be my 7th.
Shit, man. I didn't even know that about you.
This will be my 7th.
I thought that you had your first, like back when you left the first time from Colorado.
No, so I had been a couple times.
I did my research.
No worries. This is how we learn about each other, man.
Sure.
I did my first season in 2009, and then my first time in Colorado, I mean, I had driven through Colorado to get to Yellowstone, but my first time staying in Colorado was that following winter, and I was up in Winter Park at a ski resort. And then I think the summer of 2010, I went back home and had a few odd and end jobs, and I was just like, oh, that wasn't just an adventure. I need to live that again, and just kind of keep going down the path of either a little bit better job or maybe just better budgeting and better life choices, and slowly you learn how to like optimize what you're given. And you might not be making 6 figures inside the park, but you're not spending anything. I definitely
goes into that quantitative versus qualitative value.
Yeah, and you're not sitting in traffic. You're not getting off work and planning the rest of your off hours of like, how am I going to wash my work clothes and do laundry? I guess the same thing, but how am I going to like get all the stuff done to keep the engine running of going to work? Whether that's servicing the car and washing the clothes, cooking food. You have to do all those things, obviously, but it doesn't have to be so rush. You just get off and you're off. If you want to go play disc golf in the woods with your buddies, you can, or if you want to crack open a book, or if you want to go for a hike or go fishing, it just feels like the pace of life itself is a lot slower.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that qualitative value is worth the lack of the
financial sacrifice.
Right. I mean, it's not as important as we make it out to be.
You
make enough to where, I mean, you leave there and you've got definitely enough to get to wherever you're going. Even if some people travel out of the country between jobs and come back the next season and they do fine for themselves. So
do you miss training while you're in Yellowstone?
For sure.
That's got to be one of the sacrifices.
You can definitely get a workout. My hips especially get super tight because you're hiking typically with a little bit of weight on you if you're going for a backpack trip or something. And so my hips will lock up. So as long as I stick to my stretching, I'm good. This will be the first time that I've been at the park since I've done my yoga teacher training, though. I didn't think about that. So now that maybe I have a little bit more of the skills and knowledge of the body of how to not necessarily stay loose as much as like keep an inventory of what's feeling good, what's not, and how to address it. Maybe I hold on to my loose body that I always have when I'm on the mats every day.
Sure.
But yeah, you definitely miss working out. miss the kids. Just teaching kids is super healthy. There's just as much emotional benefit to teaching children as there is to being out in the wilderness. So it's just like a 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, but they both kind of give you the same young, childlike mind. It's good for you.
What I like about your lifestyle, at least as long as I've known you, is you have these passions. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had enough discussions and hangs. I feel like I know you really well, but you have teaching children and your martial arts, jiu-jitsu, and you pretty much exclusively teach jiu-jitsu, yeah?
When I'm in Alabama, I teach mostly the Tang Soo.
Oh, you do?
But that karate style that I was brought up in, we introduced jiu-jitsu, I think around maybe I was like 12 or 13.
It flows pretty well from one martial art to the other.
I was just blessed to be in a studio with an instructor that had an open mind, because a lot of those traditional karate styles, like even when the UFC and stuff started coming around and things started getting a little bit more popular for jiu-jitsu gyms, they would like push that out of their program and not want anything to do with it. But since I can remember, I was grappling, even though I thought I was doing karate. I thought jiu-jitsu was karate, and I thought yoga was karate just because my instructor, practiced other movements and other disciplines. And
that's awesome.
Later on, after I got my black belt he would kind of educate us on the different disciplines and tell us where things came from. But I didn't know at first. I could have landed in. My mom could have put me in another program, and I would have had
rigid.
Yeah,
man.
It would have been a completely different experience.
You've got your education and your martial arts and working with kids, huge passion of yours. Recently found yoga and how that has kind of like combined, all of your passions into one. It kind of feeds from the yoga and it kind of feeds back into the yoga in a lot of ways too. And then outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all kind of, it might seem separate, but it's all the same, just finding balance. And you're right, since I've started doing the yoga, everything just kind of seems like more full circle. It seems like when I'm in the nature, I'm not with the kids. And especially like my conversations in those two places. When I'm in Yellowstone giving a tour, the guest on the tour will inevitably ask questions about your life while you're away from the park. So I end up talking about the kids.
Yeah.
And then when I'm on the mats teaching, I end up telling the kids about bison and Yellowstone. So
cool.
It's always a balance. And I think that yoga has been a big part of that. So as far as like what I'm teaching, I feel like I'm more interested in teaching jiu-jitsu
than yoga.
I think it's just that I'm more confident in it. And it's where my interest, as far as what I personally want to pursue, I'm not always going to be able to do jiu-jitsu.
Did you not always going to be able to?
We all want to. Elio Gracie did it the week he died, and he lived into his 90s. So, wow. But, we all say, yeah, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. And I just kind of want to have a realistic viewpoint. Yes, I would love to do jiu-jitsu the rest of my life, but I'm definitely doing yoga the rest of my life. Right. For sure. I'm going to move hopefully the day I die, unless something traumatic happens, I'm moving.
Well, yoga's definition is yoke or union. And I think that the further you get into that practice, the more you realize that it is this unification of mind, body, and spirit. But even on a, I guess, more superficial level in our lifestyles, it is the union between how you compose yourself on the mat and off the mat. And I think that a lot of that translates into why you find core presence in your jiu-jitsu more now that you've understood yoga than you did beforehand, and why you have more patience with the children because of the patience that you learn on the mat. It's like these endless kind of benefits that come from the yoga. Right. I've noticed it immensely in other exercises that I do, just my balance and my breath and my core especially, right?
Yeah, the workout that I did this morning, I was like, okay, we're doing these squats from standing to down into push-up position or whatever, and I'm linking the breath. I don't know, maybe I was being lazy. Maybe I was like, okay, if I just do my breath with this, it'll be easier. But I'm okay with like my body subconsciously linking my breath to movements, And so you're right. We probably do it more than we realize, just placing yoga into our everyday life. And you'll hear people that, do jiu-jitsu all the time talk about the same thing, that they tie their shoes with jiu-jitsu. Everything becomes jiu-jitsu. And so there's this, I think it's just a mindful awareness of how you're doing every little thing and how to do that better, or how to balance it out. Like if you're always unlocking your door with your right hand, you've got heavy groceries in your left hand. Well, maybe, we should put the groceries in our right hand, for like 10 years since we've been carrying them with our left for 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like balancing things, just an awareness of paying attention to what you're doing, especially if it affects other people.
I really want to talk about your interaction with kids and how that, I don't know, man, like you just seem to always have that ability. You have the passion and you've got the skill set. I think most importantly, you have a communication level where you can get in with the kids. Like you can be friendly with them, you can support them, and you can discipline them in a positive way. I've witnessed how you do it with kids and like when we're together,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen abbreviated versions of your classes. That seems to be like, you seem to thrive in that scenario. How did that come to be? And how is that still challenging you?
I mean, a lot of people bring their children into the studio and you work with them for a day or maybe the first week, and they come to you and they're like, wow, you're really good with kids. You have a gift. And I like to think that, sure, I have a gift. And my grandmother on my mother's side has always been really passionate about working with kids. And so maybe I get it a little bit from her, but I definitely think it's been developed. I mean, I started teaching, I think I was around 11 or 12, brown or black belt, and I definitely remember feeling uncomfortable. I didn't remember it until recently when I started kind of feeling vulnerable in front of yoga classes. And I was like, oh, wow, like I forgot that I wasn't always super confident teaching martial arts. I had to develop that confidence, and it was developed. But sure, I have a big passion for working with children, inspiring them to not just kick and punch, but how to set a goal and then have like a strategic plan to work backwards from that goal and utilize the tools and the mentors that they have access to, and just how to develop a plan. I mean, that's all they're doing. And if you can make it to black belt, in my mind, I can just tell the kids, oh, well, if you have any goal, just pretend like that goal is a black belt and work backwards from it. What's the first step to becoming a lawyer? What's the first step to becoming an astronaut? And then go do it.
It's huge, man. And we talked about it yesterday, and I wrote it down as soon as we were talking about it, is the concept of efficiency versus effectivity, and how that's a reoccurring concept in martial arts, and also something that I apply and I focus on a lot in just productivity on the day. It can be applied to almost anything you're doing, starting with an end in mind. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more direct to tell the kids, look, you see this belt? It's black. You guys want that black belt, right? You don't want to be sitting there in an orange belt for the next 3 years. Like, the path has already been laid. I think for a lot of people, it's more difficult to first establish what is the black belt, right? Whether
That's the big question.
Happiness, freedom of time, money, a partner, you name it. You have to really envision.
You have to decide what you want.
Concentrate on what that black belt really represents. Then you start to dissect it and section it out into achievable goals. And then whether it's the easiest thing once it's at that point or the hardest is start doing it.
It's just like that self-journal, just having those milestones, like the belts are the milestones for the kids. And then now they have stripes on their belt for what the different skills that they learn that are required for the next belt. So everything is just strategically outlined for them. So you're right, man. The biggest struggle or obstacle as an adult is just to define what that black belt is. And then our minds will, over a period of time, will find out how to get to the outcome. The path might change, the milestones might change, but if you just focus on the outcome, then your brain will become more effective rather than trying to be so caught up in feeling productive when we just got our laundry and our dishes washed. It's more about, what's the freedom that I'm looking for? Is it a balance? Is it financial freedom? Is it time? Is it possessions? And how can I have a balance? Mainly for me, those three are the ones that I try to keep in check. I don't want to put too much energy into just one and feel super free of time and not have enough finances, or you can go the other way and have too much finances and not enough time. So it's just an ebb and flow of that.
The further we get into life, this whole kind of mindfulness movement that's coming about, I think more and more people in their own capacities are recognizing the importance of time and happiness as they see it as being more important than money, status, aesthetic, beauty, however you want to place it, these values that were, cornerstones of the American culture for as long as I've been alive, right?
For sure.
And I think that's shifting, at least in our immediate communities, in the martial arts community, in the yoga community. And it's interesting to me because so many people feel like they're facing these problems completely alone. But we're sitting here, we're talking about almost the exact same thing.
Right.
Like me and you are in very different worlds right now.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? We live different lifestyles. We have very different projects that we're focusing on. But when you start breaking them down to the concepts,
The outcomes are the same.
right, and understanding the need to put in the work and to wake up early, to show up, that in itself is the most difficult habit to start, especially, and then to maintain, right? Even like with a little bit more dissection, you have to do the work of thinking, right? You don't want to be lost in thought. You don't want to just be sitting there contemplating and planning this trip that never happens, or this business that never starts, or, you know,
Right.
this workout routine or diet that you never actually do. You're consistently Googling more things or looking into things. You have to do concentrated thought, and then you have to stop
Apply that.
thinking and start doing, you know?
Yeah.
But the point is, like, this concept, that pattern is so crucial for almost anybody. I cannot think of somebody who could not benefit by that muscle, right?
Yeah, we just
Training
got
that muscle.
just being disciplined to sit down and do the work of,
Mhm.
am I really genuinely putting the time that I need to be putting in on the average day in the right place? And that's back to that efficient and effective thing. Is the energy that I'm putting in where it needs to be? And how's that servicing me and others?
How do you prevent the spinning tires, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's people who don't do hardly anything, and then there's people who do a lot and feel like they're not getting anywhere.
Right. And that's
Right.
just, I mean, that's the blessing and curse of our generation. From what I've heard of this podcast, a lot of people that have just decided to have an initiative. We're not cursed with the Great Depression, and our parents weren't even. Our parents were able to experience the 60s. It's like you can't really blame this generation for the comfort, but you can still hold them accountable to being productive and making a difference and providing some form of impact to the people around them.
Yeah.
I think that there's more good than bad. Maybe every generation looks at the next generation that way. I don't know.
It's an interesting time because you're absolutely right. Like, every generation looks at the generation below it and be like, oh man, we're screwed, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, imagine what the World War II veterans looked at their kids rebelling and putting flowers in their hair. Imagine what type of
Right.
shock that would give a parent that either sacrificed their life or their entire career to keep their children safe and free, right? And then these kids go and, in their eyes, rebel,
Yeah.
right, in a very serious way. I think the difference in what's going on right now is the internet, is the access to information. And the choice is not only in your lifestyle, but the choice is also in your beliefs and the information you choose to consume, right? Do you choose to consume your information from what Facebook or your Instagram feed is, you know, quite literally feeding you, from what your immediate friend group is telling you, from what your community supports politically, or whether you're more conservative or liberal or anything like that? You have that choice of what you pull in, and there's no shortage of information anymore. You're not limited to the books on the shelf, right?
Mhm. Right.
It literally
The
anything's
card catalog.
yeah, literally anything's at your fingertips now. So the core concept of this show, Greg, is about purpose, right? Is finding that purpose and understanding that maybe that purpose does shift, but it's so crucial to have it and to pursue it. I've been recently, someone turned me on to what is going on in Jim Carrey's world, and he's been putting out some really interesting stuff recently. And one of the things that really resonated with me a few days ago listening to it is he had this moment in his life that he learned from his father, where his father chose to leave acting to become an accountant. And then after, I think, 15 years of being an accountant, he was laid off. And it was a really, really dark period in their family. And what Jim learned from that is you can sacrifice what truly makes you happy and go the easier route and still fail. A lot of people choose to go the safer route with the illusion that it provides more stability, right? And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But if you could fail doing something that is your heart's not in, or fail doing something that your heart is 110% in, what's the choice?
Makes it easier.
Right? And I think that is very risky. That is a very dark thought, is to compromise and then lose at your compromise.
It's something I've thought about, especially when I'm back home. It's like, man, I love my family. That's where the majority of my martial arts family is. I love being there, and I could go get a job at a factory or I could get a job in construction or building something that I'm interested in. There's a cool woodworking company in Decatur, Alabama that I used to work for, and I'd go work for them if they needed help. I'd love to do that because I like the trade, but it's not being effective with the time and service that I have to provide. My place is on the mats. And
all the mats.
The yoga mats or jiu-jitsu mats.
Is there a mat over there? I'm gonna go jump on that thing.
Karate mats. Maybe not gymnastics mats.
Not yet. Who knows, man?
I don't flip too much, man.
You maybe come back from Yellowstone and be like, yeah, man, I just went out there and just practiced backflips all throughout the country.
The guy that's running the school right now in Alabama, he's the gymnastics guy. Shout out to HP3. Look him up on Ninja Pat. I think is his handle on Instagram.
I'll make sure to attach all the ways to get in touch with Greg and all of his little endeavors. We were talking off air maybe a day ago about Greg and I both struggle with self-marketing, with kind of like plugging what you're into, which seems to be something that a lot of people struggle with, right? And luckily, I've had a few people on the show now that are marketing professionals, and they've given me some better insight. And I think what it boils down to is understanding what your truth is. You teach children, you have a passion for martial arts and for yoga and for the wilderness and for sharing that with others, right? And quite literally, that is what self-marketing is sharing your truth with others. Now, there's a lot of people who suck at it. There's a lot of people who see it as only a highlight reel, right? And I think that shifts humble people's assumptions on self-marketing as it being a bragging platform.
Yeah, that's
right. And I think that what really turns off people who practice humility.
I think that's just the excuse. I think deep down, I and probably most instructors or business owners of martial arts or yoga or whatever, we all have made that decision to go down that path because we want to move. And to do the work of self-marketing and do it in an efficient way where you're like maximizing your time, that's on the computer. You have to sit down to do that. But we're movers, so
Totally.
the excuse is, I don't want to brag. But that's just the excuse. Deep down, we know what that would do. And if you are gifted and you've put in work and you have something to offer, it's kind of your obligation to reach as many people as you can. And that seems to be at least now, the outlet to do it in.
Yeah.
So
as you tackle that issue, as we all do, pretty much on a daily basis, there's a few things that you do.
Yeah, I've been grouping things.
You're right. There's a few things that you do want to be conscientious of. One is that this is all very new. 10 years ago, the concept of everyone marketing what they believe in and who they are didn't exist. There were marketing campaigns, but it wasn't the same. There wasn't
billboards.
There wasn't everyone with a Facebook and everyone with an Instagram and everyone with a possible for a YouTube channel or a podcast or anything. This is a new concept, and not understanding how it works is part of the process. God, think about technology. We use technology every day that we don't even begin to understand. We use this teeny little fraction of it. We don't even understand where it's taking us, right?
Yeah.
The information we're giving out for free, we have no idea what that's going to lead to down the line. The second point is genuine connection is 100 times more valuable than lots of little connections, right? It goes into, you go to a jiu-jitsu conference, are you trying to get as many business cards as possible, or are you trying to meet 2 to 3 players that you have a genuine connection with, that you really resonate with, that could then truly facilitate something special, a new gym, a new training concept, something like that, right? It truly is about the quality of the connection. And something that I struggle with a lot with this show is, it would be great to release daily shows, but is that the best way to get people who genuinely value this show?
Yeah, you got to protect the content. Yeah.
And I think the good news, Greg, is that your content is fucking awesome, right?
I'm glad you think so, Seth.
I do, man. And, When I go back to our shared yoga studio, when you're not in town, the teachers, they miss you. They wish your presence was around. The parents of the students in martial arts, they also miss you when you're not here in Denver. I know how valuable and how appreciated it was for you to go back and see your family while your grandpa was sick and spend some time there. And I also know about the sacrifice. I remember very distinctly, like the turmoil. The decision was not easy to leave this progressive, fast-moving community of Colorado that we're in right now to go back to home. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And despite where home is objectively, it's going back. Right.
Right. It feels like that.
You're going back to your home.
Right.
It may have changed a bit. It's still the same thing.
Sometimes I go back to Yellowstone, or I go back to Colorado, or I go back to Alabama, and I feel like, oh, am I stepping backwards? Is this a step back from where? But it's not. It's not about where I'm at geographically. It's where my mind is with the experiences I'm building on. I had a conversation with my mom before I left, and I was just like, how could I not trust the path at this point when so many timing things and placement things have happened on their own that I had no control over, that were just confirmation in that moment that this is where I'm supposed to be. This is where my services are supposed to be held in this moment. And I kind of keep the options open and try to have as little influence in the decision as I can and just look at it objectively, like step away from myself and like look at what would another person do instead of like what would I do, because I have all these emotions that gravitate towards this place or that place because that activity is there or this person is there or whatever. Like, what should that person with these skills be doing and where should I be? And that's what I tend to at least try to make the decision off of.
And also for me, it really helps to take a step back and recognize, well, rather than thinking about what the options are and the potential cost benefit for each one, which I think is an easy road to go down and definitely an important thought process too. But you can really narrow down that decision by thinking about, well, what am I avoiding? Right?
So there's some truth to that, man.
I want to start this new business. What am I avoiding? It's easy to keep watching YouTube videos, collecting notes, maybe taking meetings, right? Having little coffee shop meetings, whatever. What is it that I'm not doing that needs to happen? What is that? And usually that's that step that is super critical. Eventually you're gonna have to pay that money and register your name, and then you have a business. First step, right? And eventually you have to prove your concept. You got to teach a jiu-jitsu class and see what went right, what went wrong, how much money you made, how much money you lost. It's scary, but that is the steps. And that muscle, that if you can keep that muscle strong and keep approaching that, that's how you start making tangible steps, man. I wanted to ask you about this. I don't know if we really talked about it beforehand, but half my family's from the South. I spent 4 years in the South going to school. And obviously, you're from Alabama and went and just recently lived there. What do you see down there? Coming from traveling around the country and having a much different mindset, how do you feel about where the South's heading right now?
That's a good question, man. It just depends. I'd like to be optimistic. It seems like these little micro culture shifts happen. Maybe they land in California first. Maybe the skinny jeans land in California. just go with me. I don't know if that's a good example or not. You could say iPods. You could say yoga. You could say microbreweries. You could say legal cannabis. Whatever. These shifts happen from west to east across the country, and it just takes a certain amount of time for people to catch up to speed. But there's absolutely something very noble and respectful and elegant about the South and how genuine people are, and not that somebody here wouldn't give you the shirt off their back, they would, but there's a kindness down there
there is.
That's valuable in ways that you can't monetize or sometimes you can't even express. But I mean, I'm thankful to be from where I'm from. I'm glad that I was raised in a city that wasn't too fast or too slow. I was super blessed because my dad lived out in the country. So every other weekend I was going out into the woods, and even when I was in the city, my stepdad was taking me fishing. And so I had good, unique situation where I was getting to experience the city and the countryside.
Kind of indicative of where you're at now, huh?
Didn't even think about that. That's actually very
instead
interesting.
Of like,
extreme city,
right.
metropolis of Denver, and then extreme solitude of Yellowstone. So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously the food is you can't bring up the South and not talk about the food.
The food represents the South in a great way, like comfort food, right?
Man.
It's delicious, it's welcoming, and yet can be unhealthy, right?
It can be.
And it's traditional. It hasn't changed in a long time, right? Despite the recent releasing of research on sugar and what it can do to your body, that don't mean that Thanksgiving's going to be any less unhealthy in the South, right?
I don't know many people that drink sweet tea and not like it. It's just, it might be too sweet. Maybe they just need a different degree of sweet, but everybody loves sweet tea.
Yeah.
And barbecue, it's just, I stayed pretty disciplined while I was home. I didn't get too overboard with anything. The South has its place, man. I'm always going to remember where I'm from and love it for what it is. You might have to change things a little bit, but you still get to do the same thing. Like you can hunt out west just like you can hunt back home. You can fish out west just like you can fish back home. They do seem a bit more active though. So like when you hunt back home, typically you're sitting in a tree stand, or when you fish back home, typically you're like in a chair with a bobber. And when you do those activities out west, you're apparently hauling your gear up and down mountains, hunting elk, and fly fishing is like a lot of work for a little trout,
we live in the era of like the Fitbit, right?
Yeah.
How many steps am I getting on my fishing day, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily how many beers am I drinking on my fishing
but whatever,
day, right?
like
both of which make for great days, right?
Right.
You nailed it in the beginning of the South could use more trendsetters. That's one of my favorite things about you, man, is that you're a product of down there, and yet you understand there's things about this place that I love and I hope never change. And there's also serious illnesses that are happening from people living unhealthy lives.
Mm-hmm.
And my uncle or whoever it may be is unhealthy, and I love that man to death. I want that person to live longer. Lifestyle changes need to happen in order to that. And it's not easy because I think that just the community there is very much still, you drink beer, you watch football, you cook delicious, not necessarily healthy.
Exactly.
And that's how you show your love to others, right? Some of the best times of my life have been around just bountiful tables of holiday meals or game days.
You're celebrating, and you're
it's
smiling.
A celebration, and I think what it really takes is active members of the South recognizing that we can still cherish everything that's wonderful about that area of the world while introducing things that will perpetuate us, right? That will further us. It doesn't have to be a radical shift. We don't have to immediately change our thought process, right?
Right. And there's nothing wrong with sweet potato casserole, at all. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just when you choose to have those extras or those indulgences, you do it with moderation, and I could talk all day about sweet potato casserole. It's good stuff. But it's just a complacency a little bit about the health, It's the elephant in the room. Everybody's aware of it, but everybody's...
Well, you literally wear it on you, right?
It's not high on the priority list, But there's definitely... I went down to Birmingham a lot while I was back home, and it's blown up. Like, there's climbing gyms, there's microbreweries, there's yoga all over the place. Even in Huntsville, there's yoga in the park. So they're trying. Cool. They're trying. And those are probably cities that have more people transplanting there, but, it's just a matter of time. It's like I said, it just slowly goes from the west side of the country to the east side of the country. And, hopefully people set an example and not judge. I think there's a lot of that needs to happen too. Just like, and I'm probably a victim of it too, just trying to express to my family, the importances of eating healthy or just staying mobile and trying to do things to keep your body moving. But the best thing that we can do is just be a good example. Like you said earlier about the internet, the information's there and it's leaking out. And like, how many times have you told a family member or a friend something and them take it in, and then you kind of realize that they didn't really take that in the way they needed to, but then they see an article on Facebook that they're scrolling through about how coconut oil, helps with X, Y, or Z. And you had already told them that, but now they're on board.
Yeah.
Because they saw it online.
You got to learn to love those moments, Greg.
And so
that happens, man. Like, yeah, you nailed it. For me, I got real passionate about meditation when I first got over the hump of the habit, right? And I started preaching about how it's changed my life. And, I was speaking truthfully. I absolutely felt that. And I wanted to perpetuate it with the people I cared about. And then nothing would happen. And I would feel either a little bit of resentment. That's a stage that you got to be really conscious of, because that can lead to people feeling judged and then rejecting it completely, right? And rejecting you as well. And that's definitely not where you want to be.
It's the exact opposite.
Right. So then comes the second part, which is, in an ideal world, maybe someone that you talk to, maybe it takes a year, but then like that article on Facebook hits them real hard and then they start it. And then 2 weeks later, they sit you down and they tell you exactly what you told them a year and a half ago. And that's the moment where you have to be,
that's the moment
yes, they are telling me things that I already know. And yes, how much better would it have been if they would have just taken my word for it a year ago, how much further they would have been. But you got to take a win for a win. It's like this person is expressing that they share that now.
And your reaction still has a very large influence on their courage, like whether or not they're encouraged or discouraged. Mm-hmm. So you still have to, that happens all the time with the kids. You'll be telling them something and they hear it from another instructor, or maybe they go to a seminar and the instructor there tells them the same exact thing, and they'll come back and it'll be like they had this epiphany that you've been telling them the whole time. But you still have an influence on how they react to what you say. So you just have to be happy, like you're saying. You have to be happy for them that now they're encouraged.
Absolutely, man. Greg, you're the man.
Hey, man, you too, brother.
I freaking hope that
when
it's all said and done, like we're at least in the same vicinity at some point, like we come back and we live in the same area, because I really enjoy spending time with you, man. I'm glad we got to sit down and share our relationship and our passions on the air, man.
Yeah, we learned a little bit about each other too, so that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely got some unfinished business in the Colorado area, so I'll be back seasonally or permanently. I'll be back for a little bit, for sure.
This is my official plug. Greg Woodruff leads a very interesting life, and he may not publish it very often, but when he does, you should pay attention and check out what he's up to.
Thanks, brother.
Talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to the Mindful Millennial podcast. If you loved this episode, check out some of the other Mind Mill episodes. They're all free and available at themindmill.com and on all the major podcast platforms. Also, please take a second and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's incredibly easy, and it really is the best way to help the show. Stay tuned for more Mind Mill episodes coming down the line. I'll keep them interesting for you, I promise. Take it easy. Today's episode is sponsored by Best Self, makers of the Self Journal and other phenomenal productivity and mindfulness tools. At the start of 2017, I had New Year's goals like so many of us. However, having just turned 30, I wanted something different. I wanted to actually achieve my goals, not kick ass in January, followed by the quick decline back to where I started, which inherently feels worse than when I started. I decided writing my goals and recording my progress is the best way to stay the course. I had always wanted to journal regularly, but like many of us, the phobia of the blank page was enough to keep me kicking the can down the road. The self-journal was different, however. Unlike a traditional journal, the self-journal is a 13-week goal-oriented planner journal. It's designed to teach the user to set a tangible goal, break it down into achievable tasks, and work every day towards completion. The journal also includes areas for gratitude and reflection, plus notes and scheduling. So I took a chance. I got my journal and committed to the 13-week program. The outcome was greater than I could ever have imagined. The ironic thing was, I didn't achieve my first goals. However, what I did achieve was the ability to actually see my progress, what I was avoiding, and what to do next. I could actually give myself a grade on my work, not this pass-fail bullshit mentality we seem to judge our lives by. My productivity skyrocketed, along with my routines and overall happiness. I found myself able to focus on the moment, the present, rather than reliving the past or anxiously anticipating the future. If I thought of something, I now had a place to unload it from my mind. Fast forward a year, and I'm now on my 4th journal. What started as a scary new addition to my busy day has become one of my most useful tools. I can look back on this pivotal year of my life, see how far I've come, know where I'm at, and what lies ahead. So check it out. Join the thousands of people who have had their lives radically improved with the assistance of Best Self. Check out bestself.co for all the journal options and other amazing productivity tools. Or follow the link in the episode's show notes to support the Mindful Millennial podcast. It's all available there.